Hollywood and the British stage present a world of perfection, where every star is polished and every scent is designer. But behind the heavy velvet curtains and the blinding studio lights, the reality is often much more pungent. Some of the most iconic names in cinema history had a secret that their co-stars dreaded: a complete refusal to follow basic hygiene. From legendary Hellraisers to modern leading men, these 15 British icons chose to live in a state of natural grime, turning the movie set into a sensory nightmare. At number 1 is Richard Burton. Richard Burton was the voice of a generation, but that voice often emerged from a cloud of tobacco smoke and unwashed skin. Despite his high-value status as a global superstar, Burton's personal habits were notoriously lax, especially during his heavy drinking years with Elizabeth Taylor. He was known to go days without a proper bath, preferring to stay in his silk robes, marinating in a mixture of gin and sweat. The luxury hotels he stayed in were often left in a state of disarray, reflecting a man who had lost interest in the basic mechanics of grooming. His staff and co-stars noted that while he appeared impeccably dressed in his films, the smell of his breath and body was often overwhelming in person. It was a sharp contrast to the sophisticated intellectual persona he presented to the world on the late-night talk show circuit. His refusal to prioritize hygiene was a symptom of his deeper internal struggles. To Burton, the act of bathing was a triviality compared to the Shakespearean weight of his own thoughts and the contents of his glass. He remains one of the greatest actors to ever grace the screen, but he was also a man who proved that even the most beautiful voice can come from a person who desperately needs a scrub. At number 2 is Robert Pattinson. Robert Pattinson became a global sensation as the face of high-value teenage fantasy, but his personal grooming habits were anything but magical. During the height of his early fame, Pattinson was notorious for his disheveled appearance, which wasn't just a fashion choice. He famously admitted in interviews that he saw no point in washing his hair, sometimes letting it go for 6 weeks without a single drop of water or soap touching his scalp. The atmosphere on set was reportedly difficult for those working closely with him. While he looked every bit the brooding hero on screen, the physical reality was a man who smelled of stale sweat and unwashed denim. He argued that as long as he didn't care about the grease, it didn't matter, but his colleagues often had to endure the consequences of his natural approach to hygiene during long filming days in cramped spaces. Eventually, as his career transitioned into more serious roles, he cleaned up his act for the sake of professional diplomacy. However, the stories of his anti-showering phase remain a legendary part of his history. He proved that you could be one of the most handsome men in the world and still be the person that everyone on set wants to keep at a safe, ventilated distance. And number 3 is Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed was a man of immense physical presence, but that presence was often accompanied by an overwhelming scent of old ale and dried perspiration. To Reed, bathing was a tedious distraction from his primary interests, drinking and carousing. He lived with a rugged, high-value intensity that didn't include a daily shower routine, often wearing the same clothes for days as he moved from the pub to the film set. His co-stars frequently complained about the aroma that followed him into every scene. Reed didn't believe in masking his natural scent with colic. He felt that a man should smell like the life he lived. This meant that during intense action sequences or intimate close-ups, his fellow actors were subjected to a visceral experience that wasn't always captured by the cameras. He was a force of nature in more ways than one. By the end of his life, his disregard for personal care had become a signature trait. He didn't see his lack of hygiene as a flaw, but rather as a testament to his authenticity as a real man. While he remains a legendary figure in British cinema, his disgusting habits are a reminder that the golden age of acting was often a very unwashed and smelly era behind the scenes. At number 4 is Alec Guinness. Sir Alec Guinness was a master of his craft, known for his incredible range and professional discipline. However, in his private life, he was a man of extreme eccentricities, one of which was a deep-seated dislike for frequent bathing. He lived a quiet, reclusive life And when he wasn't in front of the camera, he allowed his personal hygiene to slip into a state of high-value decay. On the sets of his most famous films, including the desert locations of his epics, his lack of grooming became a trial for his co-stars. He would often go through entire filming blocks without a single shower, allowing the dust and sweat of the location to become a permanent part of his skin. He believed that this realism helped him inhabit his characters, but it made the working environment a sensory nightmare for everyone else. Guinness was a man of the old school where personal privacy was paramount, but his lack of hygiene was impossible to hide. He proved that even the most dignified and Ned actors could have habits that were, by modern standards, completely repulsive. He remains a titan of the industry, but his fragrance is a part of his legend that the history books often skip. At number 5 is Michael Caine. Michael Caine is the epitome of the sophisticated British legend, but in his early high-value years, he carried a raw, unwashed energy that was far from his current polished image. During the 1960s, Caine lived a fast-paced life in London's social scene, where he would often move from late-night clubs directly to the film set without stopping for a change of clothes or a shower. He embraced a lifestyle of functional grime, believing that his natural scent added to his authentic working-class appeal on screen. Crew members on his breakout films noted that Caine's wardrobe would often become a sensory burden as the week progressed. He had a habit of smoking heavily and sweating under the hot studio lights, creating a pungent cocktail that filled the air in small rehearsal spaces. While he looked impeccably cool in a trench coat, those standing close enough to him realized that the cool was accompanied by a very physical, unwashed reality. As he became a global superstar and a knight of the realm, his habits eventually shifted toward the professional standards of Hollywood. However, he has occasionally looked back on those greasy years with a sense of nostalgia, admitting that the industry back then was much less obsessed with smelling like a department store. He proved that you can climb to the top of the mountain, even if you started the journey with a serious need for a bath. At number 6 is David Bowie. David Bowie was a man who lived 1,000 lives, but during his most creative periods in the 1970s, hygiene was simply not on his agenda. During his time in Los Angeles and Berlin, he existed on a diet of milk, peppers, and heavy substances, often going days or even weeks without a proper wash. His focus was entirely on the high-value art he was creating, and the physical needs of his body, including basic cleanliness, were treated as a nuisance. His collaborators often described the atmosphere in the recording studio as intense in more ways than one. Bowie would marinate in his own perspiration and tobacco smoke, wearing the same thin tailored suits until they were literally falling apart. He occupied a creative space that was far removed from the mundane world of soap and water, and he expected those around him to tolerate the olfactory cost of his genius. By the time he emerged as a global pop icon in the 80s, he had adopted a much cleaner, more refined persona. But the legends of his Ziggy and Thin White Duke eras include stories of a man who was so disconnected from his physical self that he forgot the basics of human grooming. He remains the ultimate chameleon, even if one of his many colors was the gray of unwashed skin. At number 7 is Sean Bean. Sean Bean has built a career playing the ultimate high-value tough man, from soldiers to medieval lords. Part of his charm is his rugged, lived-in look, but rumors from various sets suggest that this look isn't always achieved by the makeup department. Bean is known to be a man of simple tastes who doesn't believe in the over-grooming culture of modern Hollywood, often opting for a very minimalist approach to his daily shower routine. On the sets of his historical epics, Bean has been known to stay in his muddy, sweaty costumes for much longer than necessary, arguing that it helps him maintain the character's edge. While this dedication to the craft is respected, it makes for a difficult working environment during long days in the sun. He is a man who smells of the earth, with smoke and a lack of deodorant, a combination that his co-stars have had to navigate during many intense battle scenes. Off-camera, he maintains a similarly low-maintenance lifestyle. He isn't a man who spends time on elaborate skincare or expensive colic, preferring to let nature take its course. He proved that a man can be a global sex symbol and a respected actor while completely ignoring the trends of the grooming industry. To Sean Bean, a bit of dirt isn't a habit, it's a lifestyle. At number 8 is Jude Law. Jude Law was once the primary face of British high-value elegance, but his personal grooming has often been described as experimentally lax, especially during periods between major film roles. Law has been spotted looking incredibly disheveled, with matted hair and clothes that appear to have been worn for several days straight. He has admitted in the past that he finds the constant need for polishing to be exhausting and often goes on hygiene strikes when he isn't working. During certain theater runs, his disregard for a regular bath became a talking point among the stage crew. He would arrive at the theater looking like he had just walked off a long-haul flight, despite living only a few miles away. This grungy phase of his life was a sharp contrast to the perfectly groomed characters he played in his early career, suggesting a man who was desperate to escape the pretty boy image by any means necessary, including a lack of soap. While he usually cleans up for the red carpet, his natural state is one of relaxed neglect. He is a man who values comfort over cleanliness, often appearing in public with a level of grime that would make a commoner blush. He remains one of Britain's most talented exports, but he is also a reminder that even the most beautiful people can have habits that are, by all accounts, quite pungent. At number 9 is John Lennon. John Lennon was the intellectual engine of the biggest band in history, but his personal habits often bordered on the primitive. During his bed-in era and his later years in New York, Lennon adopted a philosophy that prioritized spiritual and mental expansion over the mundane act of bathing. He was known to spend days in the same white pajamas or denim outfits, marinating in a mixture of herbal tea, tobacco smoke, and natural body oils that his inner circle found increasingly difficult to ignore. In the recording studio, the environment was often described as stifling. Lennon's disregard for daily grooming meant that as the hours wore on, the air in the cramped, non-ventilated spaces of Abbey Road, or the record plant, became heavy with his unwashed presence. He felt that the high-value art he was creating was too important to be interrupted by something as trivial as a shower, leading to a state of physical neglect that became a permanent part of his counterculture identity. By the late 70s, his habits had become legendary among those who visited his home. He lived in a world of high intellect and deep music, but the physical reality was a man who had largely checked out of the grooming standards of the modern world. He proved that you could change the world with a song while simultaneously needing a very long soak in a bathtub. At number 10 is Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious was the face of the punk movement, a subculture that actively rebelled against every societal norm, including basic sanitation. To Sid, being clean was a sign of selling out to the establishment. He wore his grime like a badge of honor, often appearing in the same leather jacket and torn jeans for months at a time, which were frequently stained with everything from beer to much darker substances. On tour, the sensory impact of his presence was overwhelming. He rarely, if ever, utilized the showers in the hotels or venues the band visited, preferring to let the sweat of his energetic performances dry into his skin. This created a high-value image of rebellion that defined an era, but for his bandmates and road crew, it was a daily trial of endurance. He was a man who lived his life at a frantic pace, and hygiene was the first casualty of his chaotic existence. His short life was a whirlwind of noise and filth, a deliberate choice to live as far away from the polished world as possible. He didn't just play the role of a dirty street kid. He lived it until the very end. He remains an icon of the 70s, but he is also a stark reminder that the summer of hate was a very, very smelly time to be alive in London. At number 11 is Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant is often cast as the quintessential high-value British gentleman, but his real-life grooming habits have often skewed toward the eccentric. Early in his career, Grant was known for a remarkably relaxed attitude toward personal hygiene, often appearing at rehearsals or meetings in clothes that looked like they had been picked up from the floor. He has occasionally joked in interviews about his lack of a regular shower routine, admitting that he can be quite lazy when it comes to the basics of self-care. On various film sets, his unwashed look wasn't always the work of the costume department. There were periods where he would go days without a proper wash, relying on his floppy hair and self-deprecating wit to mask a scent that was less than fresh. It was a sharp contrast to the bumbling, clean-cut characters that made him a global star, suggesting that the gentleman persona was strictly for the cameras. While he has certainly polished his image in recent years, as he moved into more character-driven roles, the stories of his grubby phase persist. He proved that a man could have a high-value career and a massive female following while secretly being the guy who forgets to use soap. For Grant, the disheveled look was a reality long before it was a Hollywood trend. At number 12 is Laurence Olivier. Sir Laurence Olivier was the king of the British stage, but his dedication to his craft often meant sacrificing his personal cleanliness. During his most demanding theatrical runs, Olivier would stay in character, even during his off hours, which often involved refusing to wash off heavy stage makeup or sweat for days at a time. He believed that the physical grime of a performance helped him maintain a high-value connection to the role, even if it made him a social pariah in the green room. His fellow actors often spoke of the aura that surrounded him, a mix of grease paint, old spirit gum, and unwashed wool. Olivier was a man who lived for the theater, and he viewed the act of bathing as a clinical necessity that stripped away the essence of his work. He would often go directly from a 5-hour performance to a dinner party without so much as a quick rinse, much to the silent horror of his prestigious guests. Even as he reached the pinnacle of his profession, his eccentricities regarding hygiene remained a point of contention. He was a knight of the realm who possessed a regal bearing. Yet he was often the most unwashed person in any room he occupied. He remains a titan of the arts, but his story is a reminder that the golden age of acting was often a very pungent experience behind the scenes. At number 13 is Vivienne Westwood. Vivienne Westwood was the high priestess of British fashion, a woman who built a high-value empire by breaking every rule. One of those rules was the modern obsession with daily bathing. In her later years, Westwood famously advocated for showering once a week to save water and protect the skin's natural barrier. She lived her philosophy, often appearing in public with a level of natural grit that was a testament to her punk roots. In the high-stakes world of fashion shows and elite parties, her stance was both revolutionary and difficult for those in close proximity. She viewed the perfume-soaked world of high fashion as artificial and preferred the honest, unwashed scent of a person who lived an active intellectual life. Her refusal to follow grooming trends was a political statement, a high-value rebellion against the consumerist culture of cleanliness. She remained a force of nature until her final days, proving that you could be a global icon and a fashion visionary while completely ignoring the bathtub. She left behind a legacy of uncompromising style, but also a reminder that sometimes the most sophisticated people are the ones who are the most comfortable with their own natural grime. At number 14 is Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry is a man of immense high-value intellect and wit, but he has been remarkably candid about his struggles with personal maintenance during his darker periods, especially during his younger years and times of deep depression. Fry has admitted that basic hygiene, like brushing teeth or showering, would completely fall by the wayside. He would live in a state of physical neglect, his mind occupied by the vast world of literature and technology, while his body remained unwashed for extended periods. During his time at Cambridge and his early days in comedy, his friends often noted his disheveled state. He was a man who could speak for hours on the intricacies of the English language, but couldn't bring himself to step into a shower. This disconnect between his brilliant mind and his disgusting physical habits was a symptom of his internal battles, making his story both a tragedy and a testament to his resilience. While he is now known for his sophisticated and well-put-together appearance, he remains an advocate for mental health awareness by being honest about these unwashed episodes. He proved that even the most intelligent and respected figures in society can find themselves in a state of physical neglect, reminding us that sometimes the refusal to bathe is a cry for help rather than just a bad habit. At number 15 is Boris Johnson. While primarily a political figure, Boris Johnson's high-value celebrity status in Britain makes his habits a frequent topic of discussion. His trademark disheveled hair and crumpled suits are legendary, but insiders have often hinted that the messiness isn't just for show. Reports from his time in various offices suggest a man who has a very relaxed relationship with a comb and a shower, often arriving at high-level meetings looking and sometimes smelling like he had just rolled out of bed after a long night. This shambolic style was often used as a political tool to appear relatable, but the physical reality was frequently described as a sensory challenge for those working in close quarters. He possessed an ability to move through the most prestigious circles of power while maintaining a level of personal grime that would have seen anyone else dismissed. He proved that in the world of British power, a certain level of disgusting habit can actually be rebranded as eccentric charm. Ultimately, whether strategic or genuine, his habits redefined what a high-value public figure could look like. He remains a polarizing figure whose disregard for the traditional polished look of a leader was either a stroke of genius or a personal hygiene disaster, depending on who you ask. Behind every high-value persona is a human reality that rarely makes the headlines. We specialize in bringing those stories to light. If you value authentic, unfiltered history, support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more. The next archive is already being opened. See you there.